Okay, so the other reason why a tax rebate might be spent or might affect consumption, even though our initial model predicted it shouldn't, um, has to do with what I call credit market frictions. So the scenario you want to think about here is, and this is true for a lot of people right now, is that in this current recession created by this coronavirus pandemic, our incomes have gone down. Right? So why my income or real GDP has gone down. And so that's going to tend to decrease consumption. Now, one thing that might happen, right, if this decrease in Y is temporary, one thing I'm probably going to want to do, if I can, one response is to the decrease in Y is to borrow more. Right? So if I know that this, imagine I own a business. Okay, so I run a restaurant. And all of a sudden my income has gone down temporarily. And if I know that, okay, when things go back to normal, my income will go back to normal, what I really want to do now is to take out a loan to cover the difference, right? So I can borrow some money now, and I know I can pay it back later because my income is going to be higher. It's true of a lot of stores too, right? So if I own a store that sells clothes, people haven't been in there now, but all of what they would have spent right now, they're probably going to spend at some point here in the future, and then some. So I would like to take out a loan to cover the decrease in income. But here's where things hang up, right? So consumers aren't always able to borrow at the same interest rate that we can save at. So that's what I'm showing here, right? Is that if I was to put money in a savings account or into a government bond, for example, saving, it would earn 1% interest. If I was to borrow, so imagine you're a consumer that is somewhat credit constrained, I say, meaning I can't go and get, or I can't issue myself a bond or borrow at 1%. Let's say I have to use my credit card to do the borrowing. Well, that interest rate is much higher. It's 20%. Right? So when I say credit market frictions, what I mean is that not all consumers are going to have access to low interest loans. And in fact, they may have access to only very high interest rate loans via a credit card. And so what this implies is that even though I would like to take out a loan at 1%, I can't. The only loan I can take out is 20%, and so I don't. Right, I'm not going to take out a loan at 20%. And it could be the case that if I could save at 20%, maybe I would save, but I can't. I can save at 1%. So the key part of credit market frictions is that I want a loan at the 1%, but can't get it. I can only get it at 20%, and at 20% I don't want to borrow. Right? So I don't want to use the credit card because that interest is too high for what I'm trying to accomplish. So in this case, as I say here, you're just going to consume your income today. So I'm not borrowing and I'm not saving. So Y went down. That causes consumption to go down because I don't borrow or save at this place, at this point. Right? So what happens when I give you a tax rebate? So let me come over here. So in our model, right? So taxes go down by $1,200. Now, the government is going to borrow to pay for this. But because they're the government, they don't have credit market frictions, right? The government can borrow as much as it wants at the lower interest rate. So the government gets to borrow at 1%. And by giving you this tax rebate, even though future taxes go up, right? Future taxes go up by the $1,200 plus the interest the government has to cover on its loan. So that is exactly a loan that the government has given to you, right? You get $1,200 today. You have to pay it back in the future with some interest, but that might be good for you, right? So the government has provided you a loan. And so if you were credit constrained, meaning right now in this period, your income has gone down and you would like to take out a low interest loan but couldn't because you didn't have access to that credit market for whatever reason, the government is doing you a service by providing you a loan you couldn't otherwise get. So in this case, my consumption does go up because I was constrained, right? Even though I know my future taxes are going to go up, that's all right. I wanted to spend it today because I wanted a loan. I just couldn't get it. And so this is going to definitely make me better off. So typically, an economist would argue that a tax rebate isn't a good idea because it's either going to have no effect, or if it does have an effect, it shouldn't have, with a sort of behavioral explanation. In that case, you'd say, no, don't do the tax rebates. But there's a lot of situations, and this current one would be one of them, where credit market frictions are important, and the tax rebate may be quite beneficial. Now, it's hard to know which consumers are borrowing constrained and which aren't. And so the tax rebate goes out to everyone. And we just sort of hope on average that it has a positive effect, right? So hopefully the people that aren't credit constrained save the tax rebate and use it to pay back the future tax increases. Or if you are credit constrained, hopefully you are able to spend that then and take advantage of the low interest rate loan. So the tax rebate on the whole is probably going to be positive if we assume a fairly significant fraction of the population faces these credit market frictions. All right, so that finally wraps up our second learning objective, to understand the real business cycle model. And what we're going to look at next is to think about some criticisms of this model.